Welcome to the Mac's Future Weekly Podcast. All Apple talk and no chit-chat.
Okay, this is Lex at Mac'sFuture.com, and this is episode 128 of the Apple Podcast. And today is October 5th, 2012. So let's get to it. It's been a while since we've done this, and there's a lot of news to cover. And among other things, I've had the iPhone 5 come out since the last podcast, and also today's the anniversary of Steve Jobs' death. So there's a lot of news. So let's talk about it. Okay, so today is October 5th, 2012, and well, today is the anniversary of the day that Steve Jobs died. I don't know if you recall, it was 1 year ago today. It was actually the day after Apple held an event to announce the iPhone 4S. And in one way, it seems just like yesterday he died. On the other hand, it seems like it's been a very long time since he died. And because he was such a powerful force, his presence, such a powerful personality. And Apple did a really nice thing. If you go to apple.com today, the splash page is actually nothing more than a video tribute to Steve Jobs. And it shows a young Steve Jobs. And let's see if I scroll through it. It's just a slideshow of him and with someone doing a narration and showing him holding up the iPhone and smiling. And it's just really beautiful pictures of Steve Jobs through various parts of his life, and it ends with just saying, remembering Steve, February 24, 1955 to October 5th, 2011. And the thing is, sometimes I wonder, is there a ghost? Is there a Steve Jobs ghost? And something kind of ironic happened today to me on the anniversary of Steve Jobs' death. And now, you know that I'm, I obviously like the iPad and the iPhone and Apple products, and I'm podcasting about it and blogging about it. So, but this isn't, I have another job that I really don't talk about, and this is just a hobby. And in my other job today, for the last few days, I've been at a conference, totally unrelated to technology, totally unrelated to any sort of, Apple products or anything like that, or anything at all to do with technology. And where I work, like most enterprise places, we do have technology, but we have like Dell computers and BlackBerries, and really there's not much in terms of Apple products. And what's interesting is that parts of this big organization that I'm in are starting to use here and there some iPads. And so at this conference, they had some, booths organized, and they had a contest. So the contest basically was, you had to answer a whole bunch of questions about these booths, and if you got them all right, then you would be entered into a drawing, and the drawing would have one prize for one person. And that prize would be a company-issued iPad, an enterprise iPad. Now, I have a couple of, personal iPads, but I thought it would be cool to get like a company-issued iPad. I think that is the wave of the future. And here's what happened. I entered the thing a couple days ago, and then today, the last day of the conference, I left like the conference like an hour early. So I didn't stick around to the end, and I totally forgot that the rule to the contest was you had to be there at the end to qualify to win the prize. So there was a drawing, and I won it, but I did not get the iPad because I wasn't there. So I thought it was hilarious, actually, that on Steve Jobs' anniversary, here I actually won the iPad but didn't get it. So anyways, but today is a sort of an interesting day because it's 1 year since Steve Jobs passed, and there's been a lot of I don't know, debate, but people saying on the internet, oh, has Apple floundered because Steve Jobs isn't there anymore? Or has it lost its way? Or would Steve Jobs handle things differently? And, the one thing that is clear from the biography by Isaacson on Steve Jobs is that he did not want the people at the company to basically run the company saying, what would Steve Jobs do? Instead, Steve Jobs basically just wanted them to run the company based on Apple's values. And he had created some values that are sort of endemic to the company. So I think the executives of the company, they don't say, hey, would Steve have liked this, or Steve Jobs, done this that way? But rather, I think in the company, they probably think of the core values that Steve had built into the company, and that's what they follow. So what are some of those core values? I mean, I think the one thing that Apple does that other big consumer companies don't do is focus on a few products and make them great, or try to make them great, and use that as the method for selling products. And that's a very bold and courageous thing for Apple. I mean, if you think about it, Apple gets like half of its revenue from the iPhone, and Apple doesn't, make many different models of the iPhone. A lot of other companies like Samsung, they make all sorts of models of Android phones, and that's because they're afraid to gamble, or they're afraid to believe in something heavily. And so when you have lots of different products in the same product space as a company, I think what's going on is you're afraid of failure, you're afraid of losing. So instead of really going with your vision and pouring all your energy into one product, companies like Samsung are hedging their bets, and they're creating all sorts of different models on the theory that, oh, well, if we create enough models, maybe one of them will stick, or one of them will sell. And that shows basically a lack of vision. In other words, if you have vision, you create something as a company or as an artist, and you really believe in it, and you refine it and you refine it like they did the iPhone, and then you sell it, and you don't try to dilute its value by creating all sorts of permutations of that device. You create one device and maybe just slight model changes in the sense of maybe more memory or a different phone carrier, and I think that's something that the executives at Apple really believe in, and something that they learned from Steve Jobs. Because if you had to look at sort of like the genius of Steve Jobs, is that he really believed in pouring in a lot of energy into like one great product and really selling that. And in Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs, it's highlighted that when he returned to Apple in the late 90s, one of the first things he did was slash all the extensive product lines of the Mac, which was confusing the public. And if you think about it, consumers today are constantly being confused by corporations and companies selling goods. Like if you go and try to buy a TV now, there are just so many different models of Samsung TVs or of LG TVs, and the consumer doesn't really know or understand like exactly why one model is much more expensive or better than another model. And in a way, it's sort of tricking consumers. When you have so many different models, you're just trying to sort of razzle-dazzle the consumer into thinking that that there's something better in one model just because it's more expensive and has a slightly different letter or number than the other model. And Apple doesn't do that. Apple doesn't put complex, labels or names for smartphones. Like Samsung has, the X3925 or something like that. And Apple's are just pretty simple. There's the iPhone 5, which is this year's iPhone. And if you want, you can pay a little less money and get last year's iPhone, the iPhone 4S. And if you want to pay a little less money and pay maybe no money renewing your contract, you can get the iPhone 4. So that's, I think that's one of the core values that Apple has. What are some of the other core values? The other core value is that it's not enough just to make great technology. It's got to be aesthetically beautiful technology. And I mean, that was Steve Jobs' big thing, which is marrying technology with aesthetics and the sense of beauty, and and the belief that the consumer deserves beautiful things, not just useful things, but beautiful things. And so there aren't a lot of companies out there that make things for consumers and believe that they should also be beautiful. So if I had to pick like two core values that the company has to follow that were sort of drilled into it by Steve Jobs, those are the two core values. And if Apple can stick to, well, there's a third core value. The third core value is, find a way to make a really good product that's well designed, well made, and deliver it at a price, but a price that doesn't, bankrupt the consumer, but on the other hand is not free. In other words, Apple's not into making stuff for free. Apple wants to sell something that's really good, and the consumer will pay for it, but the consumer will feel that it's getting something of value for its money. And that's very important, because Apple's not going to make cheap, low-priced goods. Apple's going to make premium products. And, there is this phenomena in consumer spending, which is consumers really do prize products that are well made. And if they're a little expensive, consumers are willing to pay for it if they think that they're getting like extra value for that price. And so that's, I would say, the third core value, making premium products that give the consumer a greater value on the price. And I think anybody who has ever bought an Apple product comes away with that feeling like, yes, I paid for something and it cost me, but I do feel that I've been, gotten great value from it, value that exceeds even the price. And certainly that's how I felt when I got my first Macintosh, the original Macintosh. And that's how I felt. I mean, I paid, I must have paid over $2,000 for the original Macintosh, which was in 1980, late 80 money, very expensive. But I felt this was like a quantum leap in computing. I mean, up till then, I never really had my own personal computer, and then suddenly I had this like square box that could do things that you could never do before. You could design art electronically on the screen. You could print to a matrix printer. And, these were sort of quantum leaps in terms of, what I as a consumer had before. Similarly, like, when I got the first iPod back in 2001, there were other MP3 players, but they didn't hold that many, songs. And then suddenly there was a company, Archos, that made a hard drive MP3 player, but it was really bulky and the software was buggy. And then the iPod came out, and suddenly you had 5 gigabytes of storage for MP3s. You had an elegant design that was cool and beautiful, and you had software that worked. And suddenly you went from just having this sort of gimmicky little MP3 player that could maybe hold 10 songs to having an MP3 player, the iPod, that could hold thousands and thousands of songs. And it was sort of mind-boggling. And it was expensive. I think the first iPod I got was over $400, but it really felt like you were getting some incredible value. And similarly, the first iPhone that I got, which was the 3G iPhone, with a contract, I think I paid $200 or $300, and $200 or $300 is real money. But I did feel like I had incredible value from it. So it's delivering that feeling. Nobody feels that they got gypped when they bought an Apple product, and that's a core value. And if Apple starts delivering products where the consumer feels that he or she has been gypped, then Apple as a company is going to be in serious trouble. But for now, that's not the case. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is my experience so far with the iPhone 5. Now, I think the last time I did this podcast, it was right before it came out, and I've had it now, over a week. And, here are my impressions. I do think it's a major upgrade over the iPhone 4S. Some commentators or some bloggers or journalists in the initial days said that it's only like a minor upgrade from the iPhone 4S. They say that the form of the iPhone 5 compared to the iPhone 4S hasn't really changed that much. But I think this is like one of the most major changes in the iPhone and improvements since, I guess, the iPhone 4 came out, which was a major redesign from the iPhone 3GS. And how is it so radically different? Well, in many ways. Let's talk about performance. This is the first iPhone with LTE, which is the next generation cell phone data connection for phones. And other phones, like Android phones, have had LTE, but this is the first iPhone that has it. And I have to say, even with AT&T, which is notoriously terrible and has been a real pain for me here in New York City, the iPhone LTE is a quantum leap over the iPhone 4S. And I'm just getting crazy data speeds. Right now, for example, here in Manhattan, I'm going to shut off Wi-Fi and run a speed test over my iPhone LTE connection. And this is on AT&T, which is a notoriously, terrible network. And I'm still getting really good speeds on AT&T's network. So I'm doing a test right now. Let's see what it is. And the ping speed was like 102. But look at this. I'm getting like somewhere between 7 and 8 megabits per second down. In terms of upload speed, I got 15 megabits per second upload. Now this is crazy fast. Now the download speed isn't crazy fast, but in some parts of Manhattan I've gotten 15, 20 megabits per second down. And that internet speed is just shockingly fast, because before, with with just the 3G connection or the fake 4G connection of the iPhone 4S, I was getting like maybe 1-2 megabits per second download if I was lucky. But web browsing on the iPhone 5 is just shockingly fast because of this LTE connection. It's just really, zippity quick. But the other reason the performance is just so much better is the processor. This A6 chip processor is twice as fast as the processor that was in the iPhone 4S. So that makes opening anything really quick. So when you combine the LTE connection with the fast processor, this is just a much faster phone. So everything is much more responsive on this iPhone 5 compared to the iPhone 4S. So I would say those two things are quantum leaps. I mean, having LTE speeds is just, it's a totally different phone. And having the processor be twice as fast, it's a totally different phone. Now, the other major change is the phone's form factor is very different. It's much narrower. I think it's like 20 or 30% thinner than the iPhone 4S, and it's significantly lighter. Like when you pick it up and compare it to the iPhone 4S, both without a case, it makes the iPhone 4S feel heavy. And this is interesting because I do find like my hand holding the iPhone 5 never gets tired. Like if I held the iPhone 4S for a long time in my hand, just one-handed, I think over time you would get a little tired. So, more so than the screen is bigger, it's a 4-inch screen, but my first reaction is that this is an incredibly thin, incredibly light phone, but it still feels very solid. And then you have the screen. The additional screen is nice. It's nice having a little extra territory. To me, that's not the biggest feature. The biggest feature really is the speed and the lightness. And then the design is just, I have the black version of the iPhone 5. It's just stunning. I mean, I don't have any scratches on it, but it's just black and 2 shades of black, and it's just so dark and black everywhere. It's just incredibly elegant. Now, another upgrade that I kind of enjoy a lot is they moved the headphone jack to the bottom. And to me, that was a major upgrade because that's how the iPod Touch is. And I really do like having the headphone jack on the bottom because the headphone cord now never flops over the screen of the iPhone 5. And that had always been a problem for me. If I was listening to music or listening to a podcast and surfing the internet or doing email while listening to the audio, I always had this problem of the headphone cord coming over and interfering with my thumb. And now with the headphone jack on the bottom, that's not the case. And the other big change is, of course, is the dock connector. Now there's this new dock connector. It's called the Lightning connector, and it's really small, and it fits in very well when you want to charge it, and you can use either side. So before, I always had to sort of consciously think about, have I aligned the 19-pin or 30-pin dock correctly with the iPhone 4S or the prior iPhones? And now I never have to think of that if I have the correct upside to the connection. Now I just take the little connection and stick it in, because either way I stick it in, up or down, it fits in. So to me, these are the big changes. It's the speed, the power, the radically thinner, the radically lighter design, and the bigger screen. And these are major upgrades, I think. And if you think about it, if you use the iPhone 4S a lot, it's worth the upgrade, even if you don't get a full subsidy. Because think about it. Like if you've owned the iPhone 4S under contract with AT&T, you'll get a partial subsidy. So here's, I think, how much you'll have to pay. And let's say you got the 64 gigabyte model, which with a full subsidy, it's like $400. Well, AT&T, I think, with a partial subsidy would be $650. But you could probably get like $200 or $300 for the iPhone 4S. there's a lot of, eBay has a deal with a reseller where they'll just, if it's in good shape, they'll just take it and send your PayPal account some money. So I sold my wife's old iPhone 4 and got like $230 from eBay through this like direct sale thing. They don't charge you commissions or anything. They just take it and buy it from you, and if it's in good shape, they email you. And other services like Amazon does that, and even Apple gives you credit. And then, of course, there's services like Gazelle. So my point is, yeah, you might not be eligible for a full upgrade from AT&T or Verizon, but you can sell your prior iPhone, and that will help defray the cost. And, in another year or two, you can sell that phone, and that'll help defray the cost. And so every year, I just sell my iPhone or my wife's iPhone, and that helps defray the cost. And, so there's that method for doing it. Okay, so the other thing that's been going on since the iPhone 5 launched has been something known as the Mapgate or map controversy. And, one of the big changes with the launch of the iPhone 5 has been that the latest version of iOS has come out, iOS 6. So the iPhone 5 ships with iOS 6. And, of course, a lot of people are upgrading for free on the iPhone 4S and prior iPhones to iOS 6. And one of the big changes that we knew was coming in iOS 6, because iOS 6 has been in beta since June, is that the default map application is no longer going to use Google data like it has used for a number of years, but it's using Apple's own map service. And the controversy is that people are complaining that Apple's map data has faulty data in a lot of locations and is missing features like data about transit information. And so there are, some people saying this is a huge failure and terrible and disaster, and that Steve Jobs would never have allowed this to happen. And the outcry was so great that Tim Cook actually released a statement recently at the end of September. He said the following: "To our customers at Apple, we strive to make world-class products that deliver the best experience possible to our customers. With the launch of our new maps last week, we fell short on this commitment. We are extremely sorry for the frustration this has caused our customers, and we are doing everything we can to make maps better." And it goes on to say, "We launched Maps initially with the first version of iOS. As time progressed, we wanted to provide our customers with even better maps, including features such as turn-by-turn directions, voice integration, flyover, and vector-based maps. In order to do this, we had to create a new version of Maps from the ground up. There are already more than 100 million iOS devices using the new Apple Maps, with more and more joining us every day. In just over a week, iOS users with the new Maps have already searched for nearly 500 million locations. The more our customers use our maps, the better it will get, and we greatly appreciate all of the feedback we have received from you. While we're improving Maps, you can try alternatives by downloading map apps from the App Store like Bing, MapQuest, and Waze, or use Google or Nokia Maps by going to their websites and creating an icon on your home screen to their web app." And then it goes on to say, "Everything we do at Apple is aimed at making our products the best in the world. We know that you expect that from us, and we will keep working nonstop until Maps lives up to the same incredibly high standard." Tim Cook, Apple's CEO. Now, this was a pretty remarkable apology and statement of commitment by Apple's CEO. And my first reaction, though, is that it wasn't really warranted, because I don't think what Apple did with its maps is that bad, because a lot. Sure. First of all, where I use it in New York City, the data is fine, and to the extent it doesn't have transit information, I hardly ever used the transit information on the Google map that was there before, and that's because I know the transit information, and there are all sorts of apps that you can download that are free that have better information than Google Maps on transit information. But the thing that a lot of people are missing is that Apple wasn't able to have turn-by-turn directions in Google Maps before, because its licensing deal with Google didn't provide that function. And so Apple had to make its own map app if it wanted to deliver free turn-by-turn directions. And turn-by-turn directions, let's face it, ever since the iPhone had apps, people really wanted like those expensive applications like TomTom or Navigon, which have turn-by-turn directions, because when you're driving, you really can't use Google Maps on your iPhone effectively, because you have to use your finger to pinch and zoom about to see, and then look over at the phone. But with turn-by-turn directions, it's safer. You can just sort of drive and listen to the voice of the map app tell you which way to drive. And it drove me crazy in reading all this like complaints, that the Apple's map app was a disaster, because people were just forgetting this major upgrade. And to me, the fact that the data might be bad in some locations here and there, that's something I can live with, because I know Apple has delivered to me this great function of having free turn-by-turn directions. And so I think the whole map controversy is overblown, and it's not the only feature of the iPhone. I mean, people don't buy the iPhone just to have maps, and Apple's maps are pretty good. In fact, Consumer Reports, which in the past has attacked Apple's antenna problem with the iPhone 4, Consumer Reports says that Apple's maps are pretty good. And the other thing is Apple's technology with the maps, because they're vector-based, they use up much less data, and a larger portion of the map caches on your iPhone even when you don't have a data connection. And this is huge because, if you're ever like, let's say in the subway and you don't have data connection, you might want to look at the map and look at detail of New York on the map. But before, you couldn't really do that with Google Maps because you needed a data connection. And similarly, sometimes you drive in like remote areas where there aren't good cell phone data connections, and Apple's map will cache the map on the iPhone so that you can use it even when you don't have the data connection. So this is a huge improvement. Now, as to Tim Cook's statement, I think if you're going to make a statement, this is the way to do it. A number of podcasters have pointed out that when Steve Jobs sort of reluctantly came out to talk about the antenna issues with the iPhone 4, he was kind of defensive and not even really acknowledging that there's a problem, and saying, here, have some bumpers. We're going to give you some bumpers. And he seemed really pissed off. Tim Cook, on the other hand, seems like genuinely apologetic, and there's something very classy about him. I mean, he's very, if you're a consumer and you see the CEO make a statement like this, you know that they're not being sneaky or lying to you about it, that they're being straightforward and honest with you. So I do think Tim Cook's statement really builds goodwill for Apple's consumers. So I guess those are my thoughts on the map situation. Now, I don't know if Apple did this following thing as a goodwill gesture to its customers because of the map situation, but it could be. And so today, I think a lot of customers of Apple have been surprised by this following gesture. I got an email from iCloud, and basically it informed me that the extra storage that I got for free a year ago because I had Mobile Me, which was supposed to expire now, has been extended for another year for free to September 30th, 2013. So if you recall, like last year when they were encouraging people to do a transition from Mobile Me to iCloud, they basically Apple gave you additional storage. Now, the way iCloud works is you get 5 gigabytes for free when you open an iCloud account. Now, I was paying $99 a year for Mobile Me, and I was getting, I think, 20 gigabytes or something like that worth of storage. And so when iCloud came along, because I migrated my Mobile Me account to it, iCloud said, in addition to the 5 gigabytes for free that we give you, since you've paid for Mobile Me, we're going to give you 1 year free of like another 20 gigabytes for iCloud. So altogether, I have 25 gigabytes of storage on iCloud, and that was supposed to expire now in end of September 2012. But Apple's basically saying, no, we're going to give you another year of free extra storage. So this is a really nice gesture, and obviously there's a lot of Apple customers who didn't have Mobile Me, so I don't think it applies to every Apple customer, but it is like a little gesture that I think goes a long way from Apple. Now, turning back to that Maps issue, as MacRumors.com noted in a September 28th article, Apple did something pretty remarkable as part of Tim Cook's apology, which he mentions, which is that he's basically giving information for customers to use alternative mapping services than Apple's. And so basically saying, look, we care about you having a good experience, and if you're not having a good experience with our maps, try even Google Map. And so Apple's achieving that by doing something incredible in a new app store. Apple created a section for these alternative maps, and Cult of Mac has like a little picture of it, and it shows, for example, it highlights these other maps like Motion X GPS, which is a 99-cent app, Waze Social GPS, which is free, MapQuest, and GPS by Telenev. So MacRumors says Apple's embrace of alternative map options seem to be a sign that the company is taking criticism of its own offering seriously, although directing users to downloads through the App Store is still of benefit to Apple. That's because if it's a paid app, Apple gets a cut of it. So it's pretty remarkable, I think, Apple's interest in helping consumers. But Apple updated the App Store in iOS 6 in other ways too, and it showed its commitment toward the handicap through another key update in the App Store, in that the App Store is now accessible with the VoiceOver. So, for blind people who can't see, you can turn over the VoiceOver function in the settings of iOS 6, and it works with the App Store. And so cultofmac.com has an article on this by Rob Lefebvre on September 28th, and he points out that this new service is pretty good. He says the current fixes went live today and only required back-end server fixes on Apple's part, so no app update push was needed. The new picker control presents listed apps as tabs instead of buttons, which is then interpreted by VoiceOver in a much easier to use manner for those using it to access their iOS device. He goes on to say, in my own testing today, I was unable to find my optimal screenshot labels. However, each image that I previewed was labeled screenshot. So basically, I think this goes a long way to helping people who, can't see or who otherwise need the VoiceOver function to find apps. So, I think this is something else that Apple doesn't really get a lot of credit for, which is designing a product that is really good for the people who have any sort of handicap. Now, again, turning back to the whole Mapgate controversy, some journalists or Business Insider, which is Henry Blodgett's enterprise, are saying that certain executive should be at fault at Apple and should be maybe even fired by Apple, and they're pointing to Scott Forstall, and Scott Forstall is a very senior executive, and I'm looking at Business Insider's website here, and he's in charge of the whole iOS operating system on iDevices. And in Walter Isaacson's book on, I don't know if it's Walter Isaacson's book, but he's someone who worked with Steve Jobs at Next, and rose up, and is pretty powerful within Apple. And when people were talking about succession after Steve Jobs, some people even speculated that Scott Forstall could maybe one day run the company. But, some books or press accounts say that he's very abrasive and self-promoting, and some people at Apple don't like him. And anyway, so some people are saying that he's at fault for the map problem, and because it was his responsibility. It's part of iOS 6, and some have pointed out that look, he did a whole presentation on maps, on the map function when they revealed iOS 6 as part of iPhone 5, and also when the beta was around in June. But even in September, when Apple revealed the iPhone 5, he was touting, the great turn-by-turn directions. And the question is, did Forstall know that there were these data problems that the iPhone map has? Why didn't he handle it better? Why didn't he get his team to fix it and make sure it ran well before? And if he couldn't do it, why didn't he then say that the map feature should be a beta feature and sort of warn users that there might be data problems in various parts of the world or country? So, that is kind of a miss. But do I think that Apple will fire him? I don't think so, because he's so key to the development of iOS 6 that if Apple fired him, it could maybe cause Apple's stock price to go down. And even though they have probably non-compete agreements, they don't want Scott Forstall to go somewhere else. What if he goes and creates like another operating system for some other phone? So he's a pretty critical employee or executive at Apple, and I don't think that they're going to fire him or anything like that. So I do think that maybe the problem rests with him, but also it rests with Tim Cook, and frankly it rests with all executives who had sort of any input or responsibility for the iPhone 5. Now, some people are saying that the Verizon iPhone 5 is the best iPhone 5. GigaOM.com has an article entitled "Why the Verizon iPhone 5 is a Globetrotter's Best Friend." And here's why. Because the Verizon iPhone 5, like the AT&T iPhone 5, is LTE capable, which is the fastest data connection. Verizon's is a little different, whatever technology or frequency than AT&T's, as are most LTE phones. But Verizon's has a little twist, which is Verizon's allows you to put in a GSM SIM card, and GSM is a technology that AT&T has in like the iPhone 4S and the 4, but it's also a cell phone data connection that's long been used in Europe and other countries, and it's unlocked. So Verizon is selling the iPhone 5, even if you're buying into a contract and getting a subsidy. Verizon's selling the GSM part of it as unlocked, which means that any Verizon iPhone user can insert any carrier's SIM card that uses GSM and be on another network. You could even put an AT&T SIM card if you can get one in there. So this means that if you get the Verizon iPhone 5 in the US, you could use the fast LTE speeds, and then when you go to Europe, you could just pop the SIM card in and use it on a carrier there. And the GigaOM article says the CDMA version of the device is not only the most internationally versatile of the different carrier variants, but it also has a SIM card slot, which Big Red is keeping unlocked, a Verizon spokesperson confirmed to the Washington Post. That means, according to GigaOM, a Verizon iPhone 5 owner can go anywhere in the world, insert another carrier's SIM card, and be up and running. Well, that's not exactly true, because in some countries they don't use GSM. Like I think in Brazil they use CDMA, and the CDMA that you have up in the States I don't think works with it there. But the point is, wherever there's GSM, if you can get a one of these like mini or micro SIM cards, you can just use it with your iPhone 5, which is pretty cool. So some people speculate that Verizon had to do this unlock feature as part of a deal that it made with the FCC when the FCC approved some deal, I guess, involving Verizon and maybe Time Warner. So this is a nice little luxury for the iPhone 5 on Verizon. Now, the AT&T iPhone, if you're under contract, it's not going to be unlocked. But at some point, if your contract expires, you can call AT&T and they'll unlock it, and then you can use it in Europe at your whim. But even for me, that wasn't enough to switch to Verizon, because I am grandfathered in under a very cheap plan for 2 people, unlimited data on AT&T. And if I switch to Verizon, it would greatly increase my monthly bill, because Verizon no longer offers sort of grandfathered old plans. And Verizon, frankly, should try to match the price of whatever AT&T offers to its grandfathered people, because look at me, I want to go to Verizon, but I can't, because I can't justify paying an additional $50 a month. But if Verizon could just match and give me pretty much the same service plan that I have with AT&T, I would gladly shift over to Verizon. And I think Verizon's, could get more people to switch if it could do something to address the fact that there are all these grandfathered AT&T customers. Now, one of the things that Apple has been rumored to be working on is delivering like a radio music streaming service in iTunes. Right now you can buy MP3s or other file formats of music or audio in iTunes, but you don't have like a Pandora-like or Spotify streaming music service. And so there's been all sorts of rumors that Apple's been negotiating with music companies that have the rights to the music. But the New York Times in late September had an article that Apple's running into problems getting permission for its internet radio or streaming service. And the article on September 28th is entitled "Apple's Plans for Internet Radio Run Up Against Big Music Publisher." And the New York Times article by Ben Cesario is saying that the problem is Sony, that the company Sony/ATV, which recently became the world's biggest music publisher, it's caused a snag in Apple's plans. It says here that the two companies are at odds over what rate Apple should pay to stream Sony ATV songs on its service, a money standoff typical of such negotiations. So I don't know. I mean, do you really want a service? It would be nice to have that option. I own a lot of MP3s, and I do like the Pandora service, but it would be nice if Apple offered such a service, or an all-you-can-eat streaming service where you can just get any music at all. So I don't know how long it's going to take for Apple to sort of negotiate with these big music publishers. Obviously, the music publishers are, afraid of Apple and are afraid of making any deal with Apple because they think that, Apple's a great negotiator and will somehow, destroy their business or weaken them. So we'll see what'll happen. It'll be interesting to see if Apple at some point rolls out a music service. One thing that I should mention, which is quite a treat, is over at Cult of Mac, they had a nice interview with Stephen Wozniak, who's the co-founder of Apple. And if you know Steve Wozniak or ever heard him, he's an incredibly delightful individual. He's a total geek, and he sounds incredibly honest, and he just loves technology and he loves people, and he'll do things like stand in line, even though as a co-founder of Apple he could get whatever iPhone he wants at any time, but he loves like standing in line. And over at the Cult of Mac, on their podcast, the CultCast, they have a phone interview with Steve Wozniak, and I listened to it, and it was really a great interview. So this is a post. I have a link to it on Cult of Mac's website, and it's entitled "Woz on Maps, iPhone 5, and Why a Post-Jobs Apple is Stronger Than Ever" on this week's CultCast. So check it out if you want to listen to Wozniak in a very good interview. I think it's very well done. Now we're into October 5th to be precise, and it looks like that we could have another major Apple event involving the launch of the fabled iPad mini. And over at CNN Money or Fortune, the great Apple-centric journalist Phillip Elmer-DeWitt had a column out on October 1st, 2012 entitled "Rumor iPad Mini Invitations Set to be Mailed Out October 10th for an event that will probably be on October 17th. So he says, quote, "According to our source, who asked not to be named, there appears to be some truth to the widespread rumors that Apple's preparing to launch a smaller and cheaper version of the iPad, often called the iPad mini or iPad Air, and usually described as having 7.85-inch screen." And what Phillip Elmer-DeWitt says is, quote, "What our source adds is the specificity of a date. The press," he says, "can expect invitations to go out on October 10th. And then DeWitt says, if the rumor is true and if Apple follows its usual scheduling protocol, that would suggest a special event to unveil the product on October 17, with a launch day of Friday, November 2nd. Plenty of time to capture holiday sales. So I think there is going to be an event. I think Because remember, the Wall Street Journal and other highly reputable news organizations that Apple's known to leak stuff to, in the summer, basically said that there will be an iPad Mini coming out, and that there will be 2 events. So I do think you're going to see the iPad Mini coming out. I mean, there's clearly a lot of devices in this sort of mini tablet space. You have the Nexus 7 from Google. You have, of course, the Kindle Fire. And now Barnes & Noble has updated the Nook. And I don't think Apple wants to leave significant money on the table. And so I do think an iPad Mini will be launched. Now, the real tricky part, though, for Apple is pricing. And why is that a problem? Because if you go to Apple's website under the store and you go to the iPod Touches, the new iPod Touch is $300. So how is Apple going to make a tablet that's 7 inches and bigger that is cheaper than that? Now, I suppose Apple can justify the iPod Touch price of $300 on the theory that the miniaturization of the iPod involves, and the thinness of the device and just how beautiful it is and thin requires a premium. The thinking would be sort of like Swiss watches, right? Swiss watches get smaller or thinner, and that thinness is very hard to pull off, and so that's why Swiss watches are so expensive. So Apple could basically say to itself and say to the consumers, look, you can get the iPod Touch for $300, or you could get the iPad Mini for $300. But I don't think Apple's going to go south of $300. The Nexus 7 is, I think, $200. The Kindle Fire is sort of in that ballpark. And Apple's going to basically, I think, price it around $300, the entry-level iPad Mini. And you know, the iPod Touch really does serve another purpose. It's highly portable, you know, and so kids who use the iPod Touch as sort of a gateway to eventually having an iPhone, kids want that portability because then they can put the iPod Touch into their pocket, or it fits more easily into their knapsack, and an iPad Mini is less portable. So it should be interesting to see if on, I guess the 10th is Wednesday of next week, if word comes out from journalists that they've gotten invitations to an event. That'll be pretty exciting, and it'll be hotly anticipated. I want to mention that the 2nd and 3rd generation Apple TVs got a pretty significant update to version 5.1, and I've played around with it, and I think it's a major update. I'll tell you what the major part is. You can now subscribe on an Apple TV to shared photo streams. And shared photo streams in iOS 6 are a new feature where instead of just one photo stream, you can have customized photo streams that are, you add photos to it and it goes to, let's say, just a specific person or a group of people. And so this is huge because if your relatives have an Apple TV, they could subscribe to a stream that you create for them, and you could just automatically add photos to that stream from your iPhone or iPad, and all they have to do is turn on their Apple TV and see the stream and see the newer pictures. So I think the photo stream feature is really powerful and something that a lot of people are going to use. The other big feature is an Apple TV can now use Airplay to send audio content to Airplay-enabled speakers and devices. So why is this huge? Because let's say you have like this, I've got this iHome speaker. Well, I could enhance the audio coming out from the the big monitor that I have, the TV hooked up to the Apple TV, and I'll get better sound of, like, if I'm watching a movie or a concert, I can watch the concert on the TV, but then have much better audio played through, let's say, an Airplay enhanced speaker. So, that's a real nice feature. And the other big features are now iTunes account switching is built in. So let's say multiple people in the family have iTunes accounts. You can save those multiple accounts in Apple TV and quickly switch between them. So those, I think, are the main feature changes. There's 4 or 5 other teeny features, but I don't think they're as important as those. I think if you use your Apple TV, you probably do want to upgrade to version 5.1 soon. Okay, so that's it for episode 128 of the Apple Podcast. This is Lex at MaxFuture.com. I'll try to be a little more regular with this podcast, but every now and then, other events in life sort of delay the podcast. But I try to come out regularly, and I do appreciate people listening. Any positive feedback that you can give on the iTunes store for this podcast or the iPad podcast helps other people find this humble little podcast. So thanks for listening, and see you next week.
This has been a Max Future production.